I'm learning when I preach, it's always a relief to stand up, or to hear the right Bible reading happen before you stand up. So thank you, Jess. I've just been introduced as Jake. Most of you know me as Jake. It says Jake on here. That's not my name. My real name is Philip, or to be precise, it's Philip Jacob Lloyd. But I've been called Jake since I was a baby. My uncle was a fan of an obscure jazz song called Shaky Jake. And he would bounce me on his knee and call me Shaky Jake, and the name has just stuck. In hindsight, I'm glad, not because I don't like the name Philip. There's two Philips here. I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of either of them. I'm glad because I think the name Jake or Jacob is a better description of who I am. Philip, the name Philip, I don't know if you know this, it means fond of horses. That's not right for me because I'm basically scared of horses. Lloyd isn't right for me either. It's a Welsh name and it means grey. It's meant to describe hair colour, and my hair's not yet grey. Jacob, on the other hand, is much more suitable. It's a name that has its origin in this family that we've just heard about, and it means heel catcher. So let me explain what heel catcher means. And can we have the painting up as well? Thank you. So the story, just briefly told a little earlier in Genesis, goes like this. So before the twins, Esau and Jacob, were born, they jostled in the womb. They were about to enter a culture in which the firstborn son would inherit the entire fortune, their father's entire fortune, and their father was rich. So they jostled to try and be the first one out. Esau won, but Jacob was right behind him, clutching at Esau's heel. So the writer of Genesis is telling us that Jacob is somebody who will grasp for what he wants at the expense of those around him. Jacob's a bit of a scoundrel. But the writer of Genesis wants us to know something else about Jacob as well. So before his birth, his mother Rebecca was startled by this jostling inside of her. And so she asked God, what's going on? And God told her, 2 nations are in your womb. One will be stronger than the other. The older would serve the younger. So here's the second thing we need to know about Jacob. Even though he was not the firstborn, God had a significant blessing in store for him. And it's these 2 things that make me think Jacob is a suitable name for me. Like Jacob, I've received blessings in life that I haven't done anything to deserve. And also, like Jacob, I sometimes grasp for things I want at the expense of those around me and independently of what God wants as well. All this is really me just telling you that I feel some affinity with Jacob. And so when I hear the Bible reading we've just heard, I think about it mainly from his point of view. And for better or worse, this point of view is going to shape what I have to tell you today. So the story Jess has just told us then is about this is quite a dysfunctional family and a mysterious blessing. So Jacob's father is getting old, Isaac, he's getting old. He seems to be on his deathbed, and everyone's concern is who is going to get their father's blessing, Esau or Jacob. Isaac wants to give it to Esau, his favorite son, but he doesn't know that Rebekah's already been told, by God no less, that her favorite son, Jacob, is destined for this blessing. And yet, for Rebekah, it seems that God's word isn't good enough, so she hatches this ridiculous plan to make sure Jacob gets it. And I'll get into that plan in a moment, but before we do, let's try and properly ask, what exactly is this blessing? Because it isn't about inheriting Isaac's fortune. It's about something much more significant and mysterious than that. And God gave Rebekah a hint of what it was when he said that 2 nations are in your womb, one more powerful than the other. And when Isaac eventually gives this blessing, he says something similar. He says, people will serve you and nations bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. So these are big words, but they aren't just words. In this culture, a father's blessing was believed to have this kind of supernatural power to shape the future. It had God's stamp of approval, and once given, it couldn't be taken back. So this was a big deal. In fact, It's a blessing that's so big, it's not just for Jacob and Esau, and it's not even really for Jacob or Esau at all. Later in Genesis, having received this blessing, Jacob is told by God that all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. So this blessing, it seems, is nothing less than the early stages of God's plan to redeem the world. So this is what Rebekah and Jacob are scheming for, but you don't really get the sense that their main concern is God's will or future generations or redeeming the world. Their willingness to deceive a blind and sick old man suggests to me that really they just want people serving them and their enemies being cursed. They seem to want the power and the glory, not so much the responsibility. So Rebekah hatches this bizarre plan to pretend that Jacob is Esau, to dress up as him, to fake his hairy arms, to provide the food that Isaac asked for, and to go and receive this momentous blessing. And when Rebekah tells Jacob about her plan, his only hesitancy is around whether he might get caught. Nothing to do with whether it's right or wrong. They're both as bad as each other. So they go through with the plan and they succeed, or they succeed in the sense that Isaac is fooled and Jacob gets the blessing, but they fail in the sense that when Isaac and Esau realize what's going on, the family falls apart. Isaac's devastated, Esau's murderous, Jacob has to run for his life, Rebekah will never see her favorite son again. All these relationships fall apart because of Rebekah and Jacob lying and scheming in order to attain something that God had promised them anyway. In this story, everyone loses. Perhaps like me, you sometimes look at what some people do in the Bible and feel kind of superior. Were they really that stupid, you might ask yourself? You know, whether it's this family, the Pharisees, sometimes the disciples, Old Testament kings, there's no shortage of characters in the Bible to look at and feel this way about. But Jesus, of course, cautions us against this kind of judgment, doesn't he? He said, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye?" It's an amusing image, isn't it? It's like something from Monty Python, but it's good advice. So rather than jumping straight to judging them, what if we think about Rebekah and Jacob and ask ourselves, if this is what they did with the blessing that God promised them, what are we doing with the blessings God promises us? If this is what they did with the blessing that God promised them, what are we doing with the blessings that God promises us? To think about this question, let's fast forward from this story about 1,500 years down through the generations until we get to a descendant of Jacob, a man you've probably heard of called Jesus. And just as God had a specific blessing for Jacob in this story, Jesus has some specific blessings for us as well. In fact, in his Sermon on the Mount, he put some of them in a nice, neat list. They're called the Beatitudes. And the Beatitudes, I don't know if you know this, it means supreme blessedness. So let me briefly highlight some of these supreme blessings. I don't know if you can read that. There we go. I'll read them out. So, blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they'll be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they'll be called children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. These are quite different to Jacob's blessings, aren't they? He was promised that people would bow at his feet, that a country would be established in his name, that people who curse him would be cursed, that he would have an abundance of grain and wine. We don't get any of that, but we are told we'll be comforted, We'll be filled, we'll receive mercy, we'll see God, and we'll inherit the kingdom of heaven. I like the sound of all that. In fact, I think these might be my favorite words that anyone's ever said. They're exciting, beautiful, profound, and I believe that they're true. But there's a part of me that wishes they weren't true. Because even though I want all these blessings, I'd often rather avoid what Jesus says I have to do in order to get them. I don't really want to be poor, sad, or persecuted. So these blessings frequently make me uncomfortable. And they're kind of hard to understand too. The songwriter Leonard Cohen said the same thing. Are there any Leonard Cohen fans here? Okay, Mark and me, good. In one of his most famous songs, he talks about the staggering account of the Sermon on the Mount, which I don't pretend to understand at all. I think I agree with him. The Beatitudes are staggering, and they are difficult to understand. And I don't think he and I are alone in this. In fact, when it comes to grasping the reality of these bizarre, brilliant blessings, I think we're all still in our infancy. We're novices. I know I am. I think this church is, and don't take that personally because I think all churches are. Most of us don't tend to live day by day like these blessings are true. In fact, we sometimes convince ourselves that the opposite is true. So we'll read, "Blessed are the poor," but we'll often talk about material wealth as a sign of God blessing us. We read, "Blessed are the peacemakers," but then find it far too easy to turn a blind eye to the kind of violence that destroys families, communities, cities. We read, "Blessed are the merciful," but then reserve what mercy we do have, mainly for the people who look, sound, and act like us. We read, "Blessed are those who mourn," but then we put our British stiff upper lip into action to try and ignore the pain in our own hearts and the hearts of others. We read, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake," but then find any number of excuses to stay silent about injustices. I'm guilty of all of these. Maybe you are too. I think we often ignore, twist, or squander the beautiful, powerful, perfect blessings that God offers us here. And I think this is exactly what Jacob and Rebekah did. They tried to seize God's blessing on their own terms, assuming it was something they could manipulate for their own purposes. And we sometimes do the same. In doing this, they only distance themselves from God and from each other. And again, we sometimes do the same. So I've tried to take on board Jesus' advice there. And if you are anything like me, then you've found a big plank in your own eye. If you're anything like me, you've seen that you're more like Jacob and Rebekah than you'd like to be. And this might be an uncomfortable realization, but I'd like to suggest that it can also be liberating. Because by being honest with ourselves about our tendency to ignore or twist what God offers us, we set ourselves up to be changed. By shining a light on a problem, we can more clearly see what needs changing and how we can change it. With that, I want to return now to Jacob's story and look at what happens next, because I think it shows us that change in action. So the story carries on in the next chapter. Jacob, having fled his family, grows from a young man into a wealthy father, but he's not yet fully received his blessing. He doesn't seem to be quite ready. Then at one pivotal moment, he's en route to reunite with his long-lost brother. He finds himself alone in the desert, and a mysterious figure appears. We tend to think of this figure as an angel, and he and the angel start to wrestle. They wrestle all night, with neither able to overcome the other. At dawn, the angel asks to be released. Jacob refuses unless he receives his blessing. And in response, the angel changes Jacob's name to Israel, which means he who wrestles with God. And in this moment, somehow, Jacob is now ready to step into this blessing God has promised him. Ready to make peace with his brother, and ready to establish a nation into which Jesus will be born. It's a mad story, isn't it? I love it. It's so full of mystery and significance and symbolism. And I'm not going to talk about it in detail. That's the job of Andy in a few weeks' time, I think. But I want to reflect on this idea that by wrestling with God, Jacob gets a new identity. No longer is he defined by his tendency to scheme and plot in order to get what he wants. He's now defined by his direct engagement with God, his willingness to confront head-on what God has in store for him. Wrestling with God transformed Jacob. So can it transform us? I've had this painting up throughout. I love it. It's by Rembrandt. It shows Jacob wrestling the angel, and I think it can help us think about how wrestling with God can and does transform each of us. So let me point out a few things in it. Firstly, it shows them wrestling, but actually, doesn't it look a bit like an embrace? It looks to me like the angel is holding and supporting Jacob rather than fighting him. It looks like the angel is concerned about Jacob's well-being rather than trying to beat him up. And if you look at Jacob, is he really trying to rugby tackle the angel, or is he actually clinging to the angel for support? And finally, Jacob's eyes are closed. I don't know if you can see that. Jacob's eyes are closed, but the angels are wide open. This reminds me that Jacob's own vision and understanding are quite limited, but he's now leaning on someone who sees it all, who understands it all. And this painting suggests to me something brilliant, that by wrestling with God, Jacob's struggle becomes a kind of embrace with God. And in this embrace, Jacob is upheld, guided, and changed. In wrestling with God, Jacob becomes more able to receive his blessings. And if all this is true for Jacob, might it be true for us? I think so. So how do we wrestle with God? We don't need to wander alone out into the desert or Dartmoor and wait for a mystical encounter with a heavenly angel, although I like the sound of that. But we might need to learn to be more honest with God and one another about the parts of following Jesus we find ourselves a little resistant to, or confused by, or that we just find plain hard. And we might like to be more willing to express the feelings that come with this, the frustration, confusion, anger, sorrow. I picked out the Beatitudes that I love, but find hard to understand and harder still to follow. You might like to look again at the Beatitudes and find one or two that you find hard. Or maybe something else comes to mind when you think about what you find hard about following Jesus. Whatever it is, you might like to dwell on them, pray about them, talk about them with someone. In doing this, in a sense, I think we're wrestling with God. And when we do, I hope we'll find ourselves like Jacob in this painting, leaning on someone who sees it all, even when we see very little, embraced by someone who will guide us when we don't know where to go next, and supported by someone who loves us more than we can know, even when we struggle to love ourselves. In doing this, maybe we'll become more ready, willing, and able to accept the supreme blessings that God has for us and start to live them out. So we've heard this morning about Jacob's difficult relationship with God's blessing. And we thought about our own difficult relationship with God's blessing. But we've also seen that wrestling with God is how Jacob found his true calling, his blessing, his purpose. As a fellow Jacob, this is how I intend to look for these things too. But wrestling with God isn't just for those of us called Jacob. I think it's for all of us. Amen.